Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a card for the Create a Smile design team. I'm part of their video design team, and so I'm going to share a tutorial with how to use their stencils and to get 2 cards with 1 use of the stencil. I had just received the Big Hearts Polka stencil in the mail right before recording this video, and so I was definitely eager to use it. I like how large the hearts are. It allows you to add some detail inside of them and work with them in a little bit different of a way than you can with some of the smaller heart stencils that I have. Also, this heart stencil does have all of the hearts in a nice consistent row. I have some other different fun heart stencils like the falling heart stencil, but I just think that it's cool to see, even though there's like 20 different heart stencils out there, they all kind of bring something a little bit different to the table and are fun to use in their own way. I'm starting with the Inktense pencils. They are a kind of watercolor pencil. However, unlike traditional watercolors or traditional watercolor pencils, they have more of an ink feel, which means that they are permanent once dry. Most watercolor can continue to be manipulated by adding more water even after it's dry. However, Inktense pencils do not reactivate very easily, and that's going to actually kind of come up later in the video as I try to reactivate them, even though I kind of know they can't do that, but I try anyway because it was the look that I was trying to go for. So I'm tracing them in a rainbow pattern. I love to use rainbows because they're just so bright and fun. I think that if you were to receive a rainbow card in the mail, it would just make you instantly happier because of how bright it is. And it's particularly good with the Inktense pencils because they themselves are so intense in color, hence the name Inktense. I'm going to do a technique today where I actually get 2 impressions from the same stencil, and you see here that as I add the Inktense pencils, I am trying to use the same pattern. I'm first tracing the heart, and then I'm coloring it in with diagonal scribbly lines. And that's because I know that with Inktense pencils, you are not able to always get a completely smooth watercolor effect at the end, especially because I have an idea of spraying water instead of using a brush. And so I know you're going to see some of those lines in the final product. And so I want them to look consistent and intentional. I am taking a plain water bottle, and just spritzing it all over the stencil. I don't want to spray too much because I know that will cause more leaking under the stencil, but I want to spray enough that it activates well. I'm going to take a second piece of watercolor cardstock, and this is the Ranger watercolor cardstock, which I particularly like because of how bright white it is, and I'm laying that over top to pick up some of the ink that is on the stencil and some of the ink that has been activated by spritzing with water. As you can see, I did a third impression with a napkin, and I think that you probably could do another impression with watercolor paper and get a third interesting card out of it, but when I saw that not much had come off on the second piece of watercolor paper, I wasn't sure that it would be worth using a piece of the watercolor paper. The Tim Holtz watercolor paper does tend to be a bit more expensive because I think in part because it has that unique property of being so bright white. So you can certainly play around, maybe use some of your cheaper watercolor, maybe a thinner watercolor would actually work better to pick up more of the ink because the paper towel is much thinner and picked up more of the ink. Now that I have lifted up the stencil and I've kind of seen my result, you can see that it is really super messy. This is pretty normal if you are working with a wet medium on top of a stencil. It tends to leak under the stencil unless you use some kind of adhesive to adhere the stencil down to your watercolor cardstock or whatever cardstock you're using. You can use removable spray adhesive. I've had limited success, and when you're using a aerosol application like that, you usually want to go outside and not spray that in the house, and so that kind of tends to deter me because I'm lazy and I don't want to head outside to take care of that. And so I just kind of embraced the messiness of it. So I mentioned before that they're permanent once dry. So you see, I was trying to go back with the brush and spread the color around a bit more, but it didn't really work. So instead, I traced over them all. So I went over them all with that wet brush, but it didn't have much of an effect. So I wanted to think of another way to intensify the look of the hearts. So in the second card, I had gotten a much lighter effect and the hearts weren't so obvious. So to emphasize the hearts on the second card, what I decided to do is go in with some regular colored pencils and retrace all of the hearts. You could do this with the other version of the card, and that might again emphasize that detail a little bit more. I am going in with regular colored pencils because I don't want them to react in case the card gets wet when it's being mailed, like if it's raining or something like that, when the card is received. So if I were to use my watercolor pencils, I would run that risk. In this instance, I would just recommend using what you have. If you have markers instead, that would be fine as well. Something to just give it a little bit more detail, and you can see when I reveal it, it makes it more obvious that that was supposed to be a heart pattern. And so now I have two card bases with just one application of ink. Once I have both of the card bases, I'm going to add a sentiment. I looked through a lot of my Create a Smile stamp sets, and one of the sets that I find to be a big go-to for me is the Just Because stamp set for two reasons. One, I really love the beautiful scripty font that is in that particular stamp set, and I like that it's bold. But the other reason is because it contains the really sort of general hello sentiments, and since I do try to mail off a good majority of my cards or donate them, sometimes it's actually better to have general sentiments than things that are really specific, because then I could just send off a card to say hello to a friend. And so I tend to use those simple sentiments a lot. And I'm going to stamp with my Misty because it's watercolor paper, so it has a little bit of texture and sometimes the first impression isn't perfect. I'm going to use VersaFine ink because it gives a really nice crisp impression, and because I know that it will be waterproof once dry, and I wasn't sure if I was going to add any more details to the card, and it turns out that was a good decision because at the very end I decided to add a little bit of shimmer spray. Basically, I thought the cards, while there was a really pretty stencil effect, they were a little too plain, and so I decided to add the extra detail of some shimmer spray. I put them first on some black cardstock. I find that black cardstock really tends to make a rainbow design pop, and so I very often will add it behind. And then I am going to take the Sukaneko shimmer spray and spritz it on top. Normally, I wouldn't spritz once it was on my card base because I would like my card base to stay without glitter. However, like I said, it was kind of one of those last minute decisions, and I still think that it looks great. So that is it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you are interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'm going to leave you a link to the Create a Smile blog, and there will be the products as well, and some of the other products in the video description below. Thanks for watching. Bye.